I still recall the very first time I saw Samurai Shodown. The local grocery store Food Lion would get new arcade games at the front entrance every few months. The Neo Geo had been a staple there for quite some time, and when they got SNK's weapons-based fighter in 1993, I was absolutely blown away. It was the first game in that genre I had seen and played that I honestly felt might be better than Street Fighter II. It had such an impressive look, and that gameplay felt so distinctive. Of course, the Neo Geo was well past my financial means at the time. I could have saved up enough for the hardware itself, but it was the games that would have been much too difficult to score with any frequency. This led me to salivating over the arcade for months, anxiously awaiting home ports to the consoles I did own. There were Genesis and Super Nintendo versions that butchered various aspects of the original, and then there was a 3DO version that looked the part, but had some performance and sound issues that held it back from greatness. In February of 1995, it came to the Sega CD courtesy of Funcom and JVC. The back of the box declared the Arcade Showdown hits home, and the pictures looked really promising. Did the Sega CD capture what the Genesis and Super Nintendo failed to deliver? Or did the 3DO remain the best way to play Samurai Shodown outside of the Neo Geo itself? Let's find out. The story of Samurai Shodown is pretty typical for a fighting game. The evil Amakusa has been resurrected and intends to summon a powerful deity to destroy the entire planet. It has a cast of characters from across the globe, each with various reasons to meet this evil head-on and destroy it. Hayomaru wants to fight, Hanzo wants to save his son, Nakaruru is out to defend nature, so on and so forth. Your goal is to battle the other warriors and face down Amakusa in a final climactic showdown. Each of these warriors has their own weapons and styles to master. Fortunately, the Sega CD version supports the 6-button pad, so you get the full benefit of the layout. A, B, and C are your light, medium, and strong kicks, while X, Y, Z are your light, medium, and strong weapon attacks. If you are stuck with the original 3-button controller, the game employs a Neo Geo-like button combination system. For example, A and B are your light and medium weapon attacks, while pressing them together gives you the strong version. This is functional and can be used if all reason is abandoned, but you're gonna want that 6-button pad for the best experience. Most of your special attacks use quarter and half circle motions similar to Street Fighter, with a few directional charge motions mixed in there. Like most fighting games of the day, you hold back to block incoming attacks, and there is a dash by double pressing towards your opponent. You can also quickly retreat in the opposite direction. There is a rage meter at the bottom of the screen. As you take damage, you will build up rage, and once it's full, you can do even more damage with your attacks and special moves. This does come at a price, however. Take damage while in full rage and it is amplified. This introduces a risk versus reward system during the matches that can change the momentum both for and against you depending on your success. There are also items that are dropped during the fight. Coins will add to your score, while food will replenish a small amount of your life. Should you lock weapons with your opponent, rapidly press your light weapon attack button to overpower and disarm them. Not having your weapon will result in an incredible disadvantage, and you'll want to recover it as soon as possible. Bonus stages show up a few times in the form of straw dummies that must be sliced for added score. The Sega CD version doesn't add anything over the base arcade experience as far as modes go. There is the main story arcade mode, and there is a versus mode when a second player presses start on their controller. In the options menu, there are a few difficulty choices available. Versus mode is described as an intermediate level between normal and hard and acts as the arcade difficulty. Believe it or not, the arcade mode features only 3 continues, and once they are exhausted, that ends your journey. The original Neo Geo version was a massive 118 megabits. While this would fit easily onto a CD, the Sega CD's RAM was an entirely different story. This meant that cutbacks were guaranteed. First, like the other 16-bit console ports, you lose the full screen scaling of the arcade version. It opts to stay in a zoomed-in perspective like the Genesis game, and the characters are nice and large as a result. Unfortunately, it also loses Earthquake just like the Genesis version. Instead of making him smaller, he is simply omitted entirely. Other visual cutbacks include many frames of animation being lost, both in the fore and backgrounds, not to mention the complete removal of the referee and the guy that throws items into the play area. Despite all that, I find Samurai Shodown on the Sega CD to be a great looking game. Though we lose the overall majesty of the arcade visuals, the fighters are still huge, they move well, have all their attacks, and look just like their Neo Geo counterparts. The backgrounds lose a fair bit of detail, but again, they really do hold up the feeling of the original Neo Geo version. It doesn't matter if you're looking at the ocean waves crashing against the rocks or the blood-red sky of a storm. These stages still manage to look pretty good considering all the cuts that had to be made to get them there. Unlike the Super Nintendo and Genesis, the Sega CD also has the arcade intro, one of my favorite parts of the game. Looking at this, it really makes me wonder why Capcom didn't attempt one of the Street Fighter II games on the Sega CD. For all intents and purposes, the Sega CD did a nice job here, and I think it captures the overall appeal of the original's graphical presentation. Sound is an area where you'd expect the Sega CD to be pretty much flawless, yet we see more cutbacks. The announcer is missing most of his declarations and is eerily quiet during most of the match. He pretty much just announces the names of the competitors at the versus screen and that's it. Thankfully, the fighters themselves have their grunts, groans, and voices for their special moves. These samples are lower quality than what you heard on the Neo Geo, but they get the job done and add some real authenticity to the audio. It's also great to hear the Red Book audio play back the Neo Geo background music for each stage. Again, very authentic and really adds to the atmosphere. I miss the announcer, but the audio otherwise gets the job done. When Samurai Shodown released for the Sega CD in early 1995, Neo Geo home ports were still a very sought-after commodity. Most of us still couldn't afford the Neo Geo AES experience, so the other 16-bit consoles were our best bet if we couldn't get our hands on the 3DO. In that setting, this is the best of the ports among the Super Nintendo and Genesis. Understand though, that isn't saying much. It does have the arcade opening, the arcade music, and the fighters and backgrounds translate over decently enough overall. The final boss is unlockable as a playable fighter and most of the gameplay feels faithful as well. I do feel a bit of jank while moving around and landing blows however. I don't think it's slowdown or a performance issue in the traditional sense, but rather the missing frames making everything feel less cohesive and less smooth than the original. While all the moves themselves are here, there is no question many of them are missing a ton of frames. I also have to confess that I was really disappointed that the Sega CD didn't even try to scale the playfield in any way. It would have been a really cool option to play it zoomed in or zoomed out based on your preference, or at least maybe have it zoom in as the match starts as an ode to the Neo Geo original. Nothing was tried, and that is disappointing considering the hardware. It was a perfect opportunity to make the Sega CD edition stand out. The lack of Earthquake is another bummer. Even if the sprite needed to be cut down in size a bit, I would have much rather have had him than not have him at all. Especially in a CD version where cartridge size wasn't an issue. It's true that an Earthquake sprite would need its animation cut drastically, but a Moxa is here, and that same exact thing was done. The missing announcer is another area of supreme disappointment. On Sega CD, you expect these things, and I would have at least wanted it at the start of the round, even if it had to be read from the CD and the stage music delayed a few seconds. Those of you that enjoyed cutting your opponent in half will also have to do without. It retains the blood-squirting killing blow, but omits the body cleaving. As if all that wasn't enough, you do have to contend with a fair bit of loading. And it's the kind that gives you a bar that just keeps filling up multiple times, which is completely useless. The harshest critique I can level at this one, however, is that time has rendered it utterly forgettable. Neo Geo emulation is damn near perfect, and there have been countless ways to play it in the years since on other consoles. There's honestly little reason to check it out because it only takes away from the original, and adds nothing new or different in the process. Perhaps if Funcom had worked with Sega to put in a hidden Joe Musashi as a playable fighter, things would have been different, but we get no such joy here. By this point in time, I had access to the 3DO version, and that's the one I stayed with until the Neo Geo CD a few years later. If you are a Sega CD superfan and really want a decent fighter for it, this one is worth picking up in the face of not having many other options. It's not terrible by any means, but go in understanding the cutbacks, because it's far from arcade perfect. This version of the classic fighter was rated fairly well among the media of the time. Electronic Gaming Monthly recommended it highly, with even the legendary Sushi X saying it was a great version. Player One also sung its praises, essentially saying it was a must-own and a faithful recreation. Gamers wrote up a glowing review that said it was one of the best games on the platform. Even when a magazine had a ton of critiques, most of them were actually comparing it to Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat as a fighting game, and not as a port of the Neo Geo original. It really does illustrate that at this moment in time, the hotly contested fighting game genre was full of people taking sides with their favorites. Recommending this one really does depend on what you are looking for. If you own the Sega CD hardware and want to collect decent games for it, you can do a lot worse than Samurai Shodown. The genre is limited on the device, and this is one of the better options. Be aware that it has fallen into the shelf candy category, however, and collectors have made it go up to $100 complete in box. If you are the type looking for something special or specific to this version to justify owning it, keep on moving. This game only has cutbacks and missing content. I honestly believe that JVC missed an opportunity to port over Samurai Shodown 2 to the Sega CD. It would have been the only home port of it at the time, not on the Neo Geo itself, and consumers would have been much more forgiving of any cutbacks because it would have been far newer of a game. That leaves us with a port of the original that didn't try to do anything different to set it apart. No special content, no special graphical effects, nothing to make that 1995 release date worth the wait. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.